apparently, I've been reading Joan D. Vinge's work almost since I started reading. Back in the 80s, she wrote a ton of novelizations and tie-in books. But she also wrote original novels, like the Snow Queen cycle, which we will be looking at today. There'll be some mild spoilers. I'll try not to give up too much when talking about the series. Apparently, this is very loosely based on the Hans Christian Andersen story, but almost unrecognizably so. There's one or two basic plot elements that are similar, but you'll find more allusions in the story to Dune or Star Wars. To some extent, the book is an exercise in playing with and remixing a lot of the different sci-fi and fantasy tropes, and it's having a lot of fun doing it. The story takes place after an old intergalactic civilization, the Old Empire, has collapsed long ago, leaving a hegemony of only a handful of planets. The Old Empire had the secret of FTL, but it's been long forgotten, and the worlds of the hegemony are close together enough to reach without light speed, but with one notable exception. We're concerned primarily in these books with a planet called Tiamat. It's an ocean world near a wormhole called the Black Gate. The Black Gate only provides access to the hegemony for 150 years at a time. For these 150 years, the planet's ruled by the Snow Queen. There's a degree of technology and interplanetary trade between the dominant winter culture of Tiamat and the Offworlders. By contrast, the summer people live on archipelagos and boats far from the capital of Carbuncle, avoiding technology and being considered generally backward by the winters. At the end of the Snow Queen's 150-year rule, just before the wormhole goes away, she's killed and replaced by the Summer Queen. All the Offworlders leave, any remaining technology is destroyed, and the cycle repeats itself between summer and summer and winter forever. Oh yes, there's one more detail. The waters of Tiamat are teeming with aquatic mammals called mares, which the Snow Queen's champion and consort called Starbuck hunts for their blood. Their blood is known throughout the hegemony as the water of life. The water extends life to those who can afford it, creating an aged but youthful aristocracy. The mares can only be found on one planet, Tiamat. As our story begins, the Snow Queen Arienrhod is working on extending her reign through the miracle of cloning. This she does, and we quickly meet our two main characters, the Arienrhod clone Moon Dawn Treader and her cousin Sparks. Moon and Sparks are very much in love, but Moon meets her destiny to become a Sibyl, a sort of religious position among the Summers who can answer any question posed to them. These answers are supposedly being provided by their sea goddess, the Lady. Sparks has not chosen to become a Sibyl, and so this causes a rift between them, and he goes off to find his future in Carbuncle. In Carbuncle, Sparks meets a bunch of supporting characters who seem minor, but will in many cases continue to be relevant into the future, and quickly finds his way into the Snow Queen's court. She becomes very enamored with Sparks, and since she looks exactly like his old girlfriend, he's okay with it. Eventually, he becomes a fixture in the court. Meanwhile, Moon finds out about this, heads to Carbuncle to save Sparks, but ends up meeting a bunch of other important secondary characters, and through happenstance ends up off-planet, where she learns a number of secrets about the Sibyls, her homeworld, the mares, and realizes that she has a role to play back on Tiamat. I really like this book. There was maybe a bit more of the romance that I'm typically used to, but the love triangle between Arienrhod, Sparks, and Moon is the beating heart that drives this story. They're great characters with realistic motivations, but more than them, the two things I enjoyed most were the world building and the secondary characters. Sometimes you watch a movie and you love the secondary characters more than the leads. That's how I felt reading this. The main characters are great, but I often felt like spending more time with Police Commissioner Jerusha Palathion, the Mask Maker Faye Ravenglass, the ne'er-do-well Tor Starhiker, and many more. They all get great moments and they feel really fleshed out. Some get more time to shine than others, but I really like them all. The world building was also amazing. There's a lot going on astropolitically and on Tiamat. There's multiple cultures, all different customs, religions, languages. Lots of interesting revelations, and maybe using the term twists is a bit loaded, but we definitely end the book in a vastly different place than when it started, primarily on a character level. But overall, change is a big theme here. The story does have a bit of a fairy tale element, I found, in that there's an inevitable quality to the plot. We've seen a lot of these beats before, and I often suspected a subversion was coming up, but then things worked out exactly as, of course, they would have. Typically, this would have driven me nuts, and I would have DNF'd the book, but instead I found that the story beats playing out in this way was kind of satisfying. It's like putting together a puzzle that you'd done in the distant past. I really like the Snow Queen all around. Definitely recommend it. It's about 500 or so pages, and it's small type, so it's a lot. But I found it to be pretty excellent. And I was very excited to read the next book in the series, World's End. Of all the secondary characters that I talked about in the Snow Queen, the Karamugi cop, Vinge Gundolinu, seemed to be maybe my least favorite. He went through a lot in the Snow Queen, and by the end of the book, he was kind of a sad sack character. He wasn't my favorite. So I was very surprised to find that not only was he the main character in World's End, he was also the only viewpoint character we get. When we last left BZ, he was still pining for a woman he couldn't have, one who had saved his life when they were in prison together, one with whom he had shared a bond for a brief moment, but he left all of that behind back on Tiamat. Unhappy with his new assignment, he goes off to the industrial planet World's End to find his idiot older brothers who have, like many unhinged people, gone to seek great fortunes in the wasteland, but tend to find themselves robbed, enslaved, or dead. What BZ finds in the wasteland is a crucible of madness and greed, a lake of fire, and the Sibyl who controls it. Or maybe it's the other way around. World's End is a much shorter book than the Snow Queen, and it's as long as it needs to be. This is BZ's unlikely journey from failure to hero, and like most crucibles, it is not a pleasant experience. BZ seems to be a magnet for the worst people, and I found myself being worn down by this parade of terrible characters. But I also found myself wondering, as BZ navigates this downward spiral into his own personal hell, how was this all going to end? And the answer is surprising. Since this is exclusively BZ's book, you might be tempted to think it's a side quest that's maybe skippable, especially if you're staring down the spine of all 900 pages of the Summer Queen. I am here to tell you that, unlikely as it seems, this book is pretty essential. It provides more depth into Sibyl culture, and this was one of those books that was a great read, but not a fun read, if that makes any sense. I took a short break from the Snow Queen cycle before diving into If you're enjoying this video, why not buy my book? Flight of the Pangolin is the story of an intrepid group of heroes who decide to exit the solar system over the objections of an isolationist faction. There's actually a lot more going on than that. There's space pirates, a giant spider for no reason, all kinds of other things. Buy it now online wherever you buy books or at our website, www.thepangolinrepublic.com. You can also get fun t-shirts and random other stuff if you want. Like I said, my big trepidation with this book was the size. The mass market paperback is a 950 plus page chonker printed on tracing paper to keep the weight down in tiny, tiny type. I have a job and a life, so 950 pages takes me a while to get through. It's a big commitment, but after a few smaller books and a couple of DNFs, it was finally time. So we return to Tiamat, to the Summer Queen, who's trying to promote a level of technology among her citizens so that in 150 years, when the hegemony returns, they might be able to defend themselves, or at least prevent the hegemony from culling the mares for the water of life. Because the mares are vitally important for some mysterious reason, beyond just the moral imperative to prevent the wholesale slaughter of innocent creatures. There's also a big family element, as Moon has given birth to twins, because remember, we're playing with as many tropes as possible here. Many of our favorite surviving secondary characters return, often with new roles in the Summer Queen's orbit. And one of the great pleasures of the book is watching all of the book's old and new secondary characters pinball around the story, meeting each other and interacting in different ways. Timeline-wise, this book goes back a bit to cover the time frame of World's End from the Tiamat perspective, but that doesn't mean you can skip World's End. You can't skip it. You have to read it. Gundolinu is back as a main character here, building on events from the previous book that push his goals forward here. Things continue to improve in many ways for old BZ, but maybe that's not always a good thing? A new main character he gets entangled with is the mysterious Reed Kalervo, a guy who is both a streetwise underworld operative and a brilliant scientific mind. He also comes complete with a pair of secondary characters who are vastly more likable than he is, but the puzzling dichotomy of Kalervo is what keeps him interesting. Very quickly, we realize there's another love triangle at the heart of this story, and while we kind of know how it's going to end, once again, the real trick is getting us there in a way that's narratively satisfying. There are also a lot of other love polygons, and this might be a good place also to mention that this book is pretty spicy. Snow Queen was a little spicy, World's End was a little more spicy, and this book is definitely a lot more spicy. It's not something I look for in my sci-fi books, but at least it's not gross or SA or reads like IKEA instructions or is otherwise embarrassing. It's more or less tastefully done, but there's a lot. There is a plot point that tested my patience a bit, where some characters are physically unable to reveal a particular plot point to others, and I went with it, but I was adamant that there had to be a good, logical reason for it at some point in the book, and there is, but every time it came up, I found it really annoying. I'm not sure why I wasn't trusting the author more. She'd given me no reason to doubt her so far. I guess I've been burned by other books before, but be assured there is a reason, if you have that problem. One thing I was less enthused about was the shadowy, mysterious, mustache-twirling baddie that is central to one of the main plots here. He was set up a little bit in the Snow Queen, but he has a much bigger role here and comes off like a combination of the Master from the Doctor Who episode where he'd run out of regenerations that one time, and Emperor Palpatine, kind of. I get that the Snow Queen was playing around with tropes, and that definitely continues here, and that's fine. But I also felt that the story would have been better without this particular one. He doesn't ruin the story by any means, but I also felt like I never really bought him either. I just found myself saying, oh yeah, this guy again, and kind of just... Once again, like the others, I really enjoyed the Summer Queen. I found it worth the time sink to read all 950 pages. It went by pretty quickly, especially considering its size. It's briskly paced, and it ends well, though I will say that even though the end ties up things rewardingly enough, there's plenty of plot lines waiting to be picked up in future installments of this series, please. Unfortunately, the next book is... And I say unfortunately only because this book doesn't continue the story forward. It's a prequel. So in that sense, it's profoundly disappointing. I am so tired of prequels. But putting that aside, it's another strong installment. This book takes place during the earliest parts of the book The Snow Queen. And it follows Nix Lacetree, a cop with the hegemony in Carbuncle. Tree and his fellow officers feel like they don't accomplish much in their jobs since the Snow Queen shields a lot of the nefarious off-worlders from prosecution in exchange for technology. So the hegemony cops occasionally perform vigilante raids. This one goes bad, critically injuring Tree, killing his brother, and even injuring Jerusha Palathion and BZ Gundalinu, our recurring characters. Once he's out of the hospital, Tree starts his own investigation, which quickly leads him to the escort Devaney Seaward, a summer with a sense net, so essentially she's a shapeshifter. She regularly reports information to Arienrhod, the Snow Queen, but once she and Tree become involved, her loyalties are tested. BZ Gundalinu, not yet the BZ we will know from later books, but well on his way there, ends up joining Tree's investigation, and they make a pretty good mismatched buddy cop team. As a main character, Nix Lacetree is constantly having the worst day of his life, which provides enough dramatic tension in itself to keep the story moving forward. Adding BZ Gundalinu's by-the-book nature being constantly tested by all sides, and the wild card that is the beautiful but unfortunately connected Devaney Seaward, and there's more than a few noir ingredients at work here, so that's fun. Vinge is definitely having fun playing with those tropes. Forget it, Tree. It's Carbuncle. There are some references to plot points in their early stages that will appear more fully formed in earlier/later books. Typical prequel problems. Plenty of early versions of characters we'll get to know more later. Nothing that really adds anything the previous books didn't cover, but just a little extra bits here and there. I don't think you can read this book in its chronological order. I don't think it would make sense. Based on what's here, it really needs to be read 4th out of 4 in this series. Does it stick the landing? Pretty much. The book is good overall, though I don't think it quite reaches the heights of its predecessors, but that's a very high bar, to be fair. It wouldn't be great as a standalone. It might work out okay, but there's a lot of bits that won't resonate as well without information from the previous books. Overall, I thought this was a great series, especially if you like your sci-fi shot through with a bit of romance and maybe a little spice and a bit of a fantasy vibe as well. Fans of strong world building and strong female characters will also find a lot to like in these books. So that's all I've got for this one. We'll see you in the next one. Bye!